court filings, the case is not, the core of it's not, money for sex. We would say it's about conspiring to corrupt a presidential election, and then, lying in New York business records to cover it up. And so that's the heart of the case as we've laid out in court filings.
Election interference. That's how the Manhattan District Attorney is seeking to frame this hush money case against Donald Trump. Our friend Barbara McQuaid says Bragg is right. There is much more at stake than just hush money. She writes, along with two other attorneys, quote, the salaciousness of the details in Mr. Trump's case obscures what it is actually about, making covert payments to avoid losing an election and then further concealing it. Mr. Bragg will face tough challenges ahead, fueled by lingering skepticism that critics have harbored about the strength of the evidence and whether Mr. Trump has been unfairly targeted. But we think he can overcome those hurdles and, by seeking to secure a conviction, reinforce the principle that in Manhattan, as across the country, playing by the rules is critical to the integrity of both our businesses and our democracy. Joining me at the table, our friend MSNBC legal correspondent Lisa Rubin. The piece we read from Lisa, it lays out a series of different hurdles in this case. One, the question of the legal foundations of the case, the credibility of star witness Michael Cohen, which you and I have discussed quite a bit in the past few days, and controlling defendant Trump, which, yes, that is a common denominator in all of these cases. How do you think they clear those hurdles?
I think they've already cleared the first one. So, for example, Judge Juan Merchan last week disposed of Trump's pretrial motions to dismiss. One of those motions to dismiss was based on the legal theory in the case. Basically, the DA charged Trump with 34 counts of falsification of business records with the intent to commit or conceal another felony. And there have been all these doubters all along that that underlying felony could not be, for example, a federal election law violation, or could not even be a violation of New York state law that essentially prohibits conspiring to promote someone or scheme to elect someone. Judge Merchan's opinion, which he did not read from the bench, he sort of said, well, I deny them all. Let's move on to scheduling. But if you read that opinion, he really dismantles that defense. So I think we're over the hurdle of the legal theory. I think Judge Merchan has also shown that he, like Barb said in the piece, is much more cut from the cloth of a Judge Kaplan than a Justice Arthur Engoron. He was very intolerant of nonsense in his courtroom. He was happy to let Todd Blanche, the principal lawyer for Donald Trump, make his record, but he was not going to, for example, indulge repetition. I saw a judge who was firmly in command of his courtroom. I expect that to continue to be the case. And then there's the remaining bit, which is the importance of Michael Cohen. Trump's folks said at this last trial, the New York AG's civil fraud case, that Cohen was the star witness. That oversells Cohen's importance in that case. There was so much documentary evidence, so much so that Judge Engoron at one point said the amount of evidence that they have could fill this courtroom. And I remember my mind at the time just filling space with boxes all over the place. This is less a documents case than that one was. There are still going to be some documents here, namely checks that Donald Trump himself signed. But Michael Cohen is indeed a very significant witness here. I will caution, however, to say that that's based on what we know right now. We don't know what documentary evidence or other evidence the DA has up his sleeve. And I expect that it is much more than what we understand presently. A good prosecutor does not lay all their cards out on the table. Alvin Bragg has shown himself to be a savvier prosecutor than many people thought.
Given that series of developments that you just walked us through, do you have a sense then of how the strategy on the part of either team has evolved, right? If you say, okay, there was a question about Michael Cohen's credibility. It is not the same question it once was. We can put that aside. There was a question about case law and the legal framework of this. We now have some insights into that. Does any of that change then the way that they approach this case moving forward?
Yes and no. I don't think it changes the way that the Trump folks deal with Michael Cohen. So putting aside the fact that Justice Engoron saw him as a credible witness, notwithstanding a prior perjury conviction and allegations that he had perjured himself on the stand in that case before him, Justice Engoron essentially said, no, Michael Cohen was telling the truth. I saw someone honest, relaxed, corroborated by other evidence in the case. Does that matter to Donald Trump? Not one bit. Michael Cohen is his sworn enemy. He will stop at nothing to destroy his credibility. He will continue to accuse him of lying on the stand, and that will be a particularly rough cross-examination. Does it change their strategy in one other respect, though? Maybe. Their other big witness in the case is Alan Weisselberg, who, according to the DA's statement of facts in the case, was in the room for conversations that, unless the DA is withholding something on us in that recitation of facts, those were conversations that were only among Weisselberg, as we have discussed, the unholy trinity of Cohen, Weisselberg, and Trump. Weisselberg might have been an attractive option to testify for Donald Trump until this trial, where we know, according to the New York Times, he is being investigated for or in negotiations as to a plea deal about his testimony and the New York AG civil fraud trial. If he pleads guilty to perjuring himself in the most recent New York State trial before this upcoming criminal trial, do Donald Trump's people put him on the stand? Probably not. The first thing you don't want to have happen in a cross-examination is, did you recently plead guilty to perjury, Mr. Weisselberg? Right? And so, notwithstanding the fact that Cohen himself is not a person who has a reputation for extraordinary veracity, you can explain the turn that he has taken in his life to try to recover the truth. Alan Weisselberg is a different story.